now, I have one more buildings. I found it work by Lena Bobardi. I'll hold down and copy the code, return to Twitter, type in the hashtag, and paste the code. Now let's get one more in, since there aren't really limitations with the number of buildings you can combine. Code, select, copy, switch, hashtag, paste. Now, I can send the tweet. Selecting the me icon at the bottom of the page, I will return to my profile, where I'll see the tweet I just sent. What this means is I've selected a bunch of buildings from the list and given it to the bot. So let's see if we can do a little walkthrough of a tweet together. I'll give you a second at home to keep your hands on your nearest device, and you'll just have to make sure you're open to your Twitter app. To do this, you can slide to unlock the device, double click on the home button, and you'll see the active apps where you can select Twitter. Okay, great. Now, presumably you're logged in, so we can go ahead and compose a tweet by selecting the quill icon in the corner. I'll type @arcmixes with an H. Double click on my home button to get the option to return to my browser, where I will find the Arcmix list tab. Scrolling through the list, let's locate Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum. Here I held down to highlight the code, and once it's been highlighted, the option to copy it pops up, which I can select. I will double click on my home button to return to Twitter, provide a space, include a hashtag, and tap once in front of it to select the paste option so you can paste your code. Into the list, Jean Nouvel's Bourgeois House building. That's selected. Return to Twitter. And include a hashtag before I paste the code. Going back to the next list, I'll find Renzo's Gamma. After this one is also pasted, we can send a tweet. I think I'll do one more for myself while you create your own. we might already see some of our results with an image of the mix and names of the buildings we've called. Now I'll navigate to the ArcMix's webpage to see some more results, so feel free to follow along. It's sort of like the command center, where we can see where your work gets dispersed. It's located at arcmix.es. Textures exist as images, for instance, if we navigate to Pinterest here. In the guest mix board, you see that our design has already become part of a larger body of designs made by other amateurs. We'll head back to the ArcMix page by double tapping on the home button. If we select the Sketchfab icon, we can see the same as the case where 3D files are downloadable and 3D printable. Dragging your finger across the screen lets you orbit around the object. I'll head back to arcmix.es for one last time to select the Shopify icon. We need to navigate through the catalog and scroll to the bottom of the page and select the last page. Our design here has been listed for sale, and if someone chooses to purchase it, a 3D print is created, and the profits are split between ArcMix's and the Twitter author. Back to Twitter now by double-clicking on the home button, and we can see the images of the original designs we tweeted.
So what did you think of the ArcMix's Twitter blog? Is this a way architecture could become valuable to the economy of the world? Did you and your friends engage with it? How did you feel about searching, selecting, combining, tagging, archiving, and sharing? Give us your thoughts. We would love to hear.
To whom am I speaking?
Yes.
Will you review yourself? So that's the end.
I keep trying to figure out how the technology of the web, I know that sounds very generic, but let's just accept that as a starting point, might be disruptive to the process of creating architecture is a very interesting proposition, something that as a discipline we need to do. Now I have a lot of opinions about the products and the processes. So I think also, like probably with most thesis projects, there's many ways in which we can discuss it. So first I want to say that I hope that in some part of the conversation we can talk about unfair fair use and as work and under the influence out there, which is, I don't think the output that the interface is putting forward is architecture. Because you use these architectural precedents as primitives, I think the way that they're collaged is equivalent to how children might use pasta for a collage. It's the same. Here, architecture has the same role as a noodle. And I find that a little bit, in that context, problematic. Like, we assume that because the primitives have architectural value, when recontextualized with other primitives, it's going to be equally valuable. I don't find it like a valid proposition. So that's the first version of the project. I think there's another aspect which talks more about the politics of the project, this idea that we're democratizing the process of creating architecture, but not architectural space, the process of creating the architecture. And I think there's a conversation there to be had, which is also attached to questions of the value of disciplinary knowledge. And I'm thinking, would anybody dare tell somebody that works in, for example, creating vaccines, that if you put all the components of vaccines and just randomly mix them, we're going to create something? You know, like, there's knowledge that is valuable in how perhaps we would evaluate these things that come from the discipline. And the last one is that perhaps there's a moment of design intentionality. I don't know what the algorithm is that determines how you put the pieces together. Now they seem to be somehow in some geometrical center point or registration point, and all the buildings accumulate through that point. But there can be considered a design act to design how the pieces are put together. So instead of assuming that they just come on top of one another randomly, maybe there is more work done. So when, depending on which precedents you choose, things come together in a specific way. So somebody already introduced design intentionality. So those are kind of the 3 lines of inquiry that I thought we'll just put out there to start.
To respond to some, the comparison with the noodle is something I've been concerned about, but I think given the democratization of access to tools in general, in other, for instance, music and making things with Photoshop, this is an access point for amateurs effectively. Maybe this isn't exclusively for the idea of a professional, but how do people start to access tools? And more importantly, this tool, it's not just like, I know it has history embedded in it, in some sense. So an amateur that doesn't have familiarity with architecture, this is a way into architecture, right? That's sort of the value I see in this. Sure, the logic combination isn't thoughtful in that way, but the sort of archive of buildings they're choosing from gives them an access into the discipline.
Representing architecture as empty shells, these are just objects.
It's a starting point.
How do you feel it could evolve? Because I accept that, and I'm intrigued in how it could evolve beyond that starting point. That is, like, makes the architectural bit superficial.
Well, more, and the evolution I see is more than just starting one. It's that these objects can become, even the ones that are made by people using starting points for new things as well. So as much as these are reusing architecture that we might know in the world, they could eventually be reused by others in the mashed up forms that they take now. I think that's an interesting thing. They become part of the larger archive that people can engage. They become architectural objects in that sense. We understand buildings now as images as images online, or as visual bytes, as I like to call them. And we can make from them. And so these things enter into circulation as people can reuse them, effectively create new things. And I think that's sort of the direction I see from.
Just in the end, they all look like Hungarian. So, all right, I'll just pass on the mic.
I'm not quite sure how to theorize this just yet, but this setup I think is absolutely genius. Like, in the future, someone will deliver a pizza without my asking. And then yeah, I'll have a pizza. Like, it smells terrible. And then also in the future, like there will be a kind of like have no color. They are simply like a form of simulacra of their own environment. But what that environment is, we can't know because it's like withheld from us somewhere in digital space. So there's something about like the serial distraction of attention away from the goal or object, like from the delivery of the pizza to the spinning to the reflection. Like I can't ever get to the thing. That to me, just on a sort of purely intuitive basis, feels extremely contemporary. What that has to do with these as products or your kind of apparent earnestness in arguing for this as a design tool, I don't know. Or as a kind of gateway drug for architecture, I don't know. And so can you help us understand the connection between like this and that?
Yeah. I mean, it might have sounded like I was arguing for it earnestly. I think the relevance more than just the objects is that things get around. Architecture gets around, gets around as meshes, as images. So what's the consequence of that, and how do we participate in having it? I guess that's more important to me than the objects. And so for me, it was using that as a platform, like using the online world as a way to engage them, let them stay there, and multiply. As you said, the sort of issue about speed.
You know, I take the Gary comment back. They don't know.
They're all Moshe Safdie
Yeah.
projects.
But in a way, when you try to democratize design, you also contract architecture to be one thing, which is opaque objects. Did you ever think about taking pieces of interiors or simply just floors or just windows? In other words, a landscape, a wider landscape of things which constitute architecture that could help educate an audience as to, other possible interpretations.
I've been playing with different formats of visual content, but this one was constrained to the archive of just Google Warehouse. For the most part, this is stuff that like you can see on Google Earth, and so it's recognizable by the user. And so that's what I wanted to play on. It's sort of their objectification, these downloadable meshes that aren't just objects. Sometimes they have computers, but most of the time they don't. Not generally accurate, they're abstracted in ways. A lot of the times, the detail you get from them are just maps, they're not actually modeled. So I wanted to find ways to expose how other people, general managers, have been making things, putting them online anyway. And how do we inherit them as well? We inherit them using some of our big project anyway, whether it's for context or finding material, building and stuff. So that's how it ended up being about the exterior.
It just seems to exacerbate reductance.
On the other hand, I think I agree with that. But on the other hand, I think it's so incredible what amateurs are doing with other platforms that come either from music or from Photoshop or stuff like that. But it does give me, like I'm both horrified and curious about what, given the instrument, if you put it online enough time, what eventually would happen. People will start building their own building blocks, they will start expanding the library of sources, they will begin. So we've seen how the acceleration of the development of these tools, like you start, like I see this as a seed for something, not as the end product. That's why I'm interested in imagining where it could go, because, I'm slightly horrified, but curious at the same time.
Yeah, I'll be able to pick up maybe a couple of your strands. One is like, for me, one of the biggest questions, just important question, is like where value lies. Like we can talk about value lying in real-time production. Make it, and you move really fast towards production, and it gets bought sold, right? There's a value in just, I think it's a weird thing. There's another value in a kind of didactic idea that you put things together, and then, I don't know if you notice, there's sunlight in the environment. It's the only part of the environment that exists is sunlight. That the whole thing starts starts shifting based on sunlight, so it can be didactic. It can educate people like about there's a form, but then the form is actually trying to react a little bit to the environment, so then it's helping to mesh. The sun position is actually helping it to mesh and become less recognizable. Like, but it's reacting to the sun is showing people that like architecture positions itself relative to orientation. Right? It's a didactic. That would add value to the consumer, then it starts to tell you something about architecture. The architecture tries to react to the environment. Right? So in many ways, the question is like where value lies and how to push it towards something that's valuable. Because I feel there's a kind of like a haunt of a kind of commercialism and a populism, which is really interesting. But for me, there's a little bit of ambivalence about where value lies and then how to intensify,
I can tell you
incentivize.
who do you think sets that value up? Is it the general population or is it the architecture world?
Yeah, especially like where are you as an author in the production of that?
But it seems like these are, the things that we're looking at now are definitely authored, right?
These ones
I mean, you showed us, you took us through a process where we all made, or some of us made some colorful stuff, right? Yeah, let me see. Make it out of mine. But each of these has a name, and they're very specific projects you took. And you know, there's like Como before and after or something. Diamond House and Wall. Like there's actually architecturally informed, historically informed moves that you're putting together here. So authorship may seem nebulous in the beginning of your narrative, but in these objects, it's there. It's available for us to contemplate.
But then that's a tool for architects.
Yeah, I think never given as much of a framework to understand or to get a way into it. And I immediately think back to when collage was adopted as a radical technique in the arts. There's a period of collage. Even then, there were a few people like Bill Schwitter's, for instance, wondering at how that would sustain itself and trying to find a legitimate, personalized use of nets and of stuff. And it was a constantly evolving art that he was interpreting continually. So there was an aesthetic question amongst much of the work that was just kind of playing out again and again and again until it petered out into nothing. And I think the collage project sort of vanished into Rauschenberg and it sort of just withered away because it had run its moment. And you haven't given us a sort of stake what you were after with this other than just witnessing that you can now do collage in 3 dimensions because you're not interpreting any of these forums, you're not trying to find a personal vocabulary, it's just kind of and I predict it will also peter out pretty quickly. The artists, I mean, if you look at music and dance, I mean, there's plenty of collage being done. But the artists I find myself far more intrigued by are the ones who try to avoid the art of the evident. That's a full Forsyth line. So after 3 of these, I think I found myself getting bored because it was just so obvious to me what it was that it didn't sustain my interest in content. And so yes, it's funny after a while, but it's kind of come on. So how do you answer that? Is it an adequate armature given that it's already played itself out in the arts? Now we can do it 3 dimensions fine. But then what's your take going to be on it not petering out and actually finding an adequate aesthetic, sort of legitimacy that will sustain somebody like myself from boredom?
The first point I want to make is that it's a process-based thing. So I agree with the arts, whether it's visual arts or music, a lot of it is dependent now on pre-existing material. You're sampling stuff. Sometimes it's recognizable, sometimes it's not. So yeah, maybe the issue of legibility of pieces is something that I was curious about. So there were versions of this where they were sort of uncanny small changes to existing buildings, and ones where they
project, because you're not giving us enough framework, you're not reading these back to us in interesting ways, and therefore very quickly I think it ceases to become, architecture. Take his point. He's being provocative as a lot of architects call on the technical domain. So how would you answer that too? Just relying on a technique and putting it up there and hoping it works seems to be sort of abandonment.
I think the value of sticking to one technique in this case is to create a body of things from different pieces, and so what are the consequences of that? If they are all composed of the same technique. I wasn't trying to
That is an answer to the evidence. Because once as soon as you see a recognizing those things like
But that's also because they're coming, in this case, we could say maybe they're coming from one author. So that's the reason that they're evident as a body, but maybe a different author could, again, use these pieces, compose them in their own way to create a body or collection of things.
One thing I'm really intrigued about is the possibility that you would not try to justify each of these objects, but instead start to engage your kind of suggestion of a conversation about image as being the thing that you're after. So it seems to me like we can distinguish image from picture maybe in just sort of like one gross way. I'm certainly not like a theorist prepared to engage that in detail, but the image anticipates the way in which it's going to be, in which it travels and will be consumed. And good images are those that travel quickly across lots of different media and can be consumed easily or in sort of large quantities. And so I'm just trying to catalog the way in which you have put forward some successful images, and then maybe try to think about how those tactics could be assembled. So I'm not certain that collage is good or bad in the context of the image. I think it just has a certain body of consequences that allow images to travel. So one is the kind of architecture engine, like Snark, and to my mind, like the best of those is the House 6 plus Vanna Venturi. Like that's pretty fun. There's the kind of like radical flattening effect where things that do not, from sort of high and low sources coexist on a single plane. There's the kind of pleasure of seeing sort of haute couture architecture reduced to a tchotchke. So there is a kind of degradation of its value, but then like a reassignment of value because it's sparkling and glittery, like it's silver plated, like an ornament. There are certain kinds of scalar mismatches that you're playing with, where there's a kind of like shock that something so big could be so small, and vice versa. So for me, it's about the enumeration of that catalog of pleasures that might allow this to travel or be forwarded, and then a kind of theory of what is, of the success of the image, and then a replenishment of that catalog. Like I agree there is an exhaustion, but thank God the technique is so easy. Like therefore, we could easily invent new techniques that could in turn be exhausted and promote a kind of new list of ways to circulate.
I wonder if that goes back to my question about the technical. Like if, for example, you were to make available to the user the possibility of decide how the buildings come together, when they come together, issues of scale, again, in which registration point the objects end up collapsing. I wonder if at some point the issue of, I was thinking of Stan Allen's essay on collage and montage and the different sort of instrumentalizations of the two, whether if the preservation of the edges or the differences is important and instrumental versus, or in opposition to the creation of a new reality where those sources are not only not important, but they're better served when you cannot see the differences anymore. Like I still find that these guys all respond to the same version. Although in some I think the compositions are more successful than in others, or I personally prefer them over the others. So for me, as I say, the best version of these software, app, or instrument, or whatever, is to think of it as a seed, as the generation one of a certain tool that is going to have many more
mean, I have a question for Andrew, and curious to hear your comment. Is it like the end of the video sequence, would it be like different forms of play enacted? Like there's like kids like playing with one. There's like two architects, two historians, like trying to kind of think of a scenario and putting it together. Is it like to find play, like different forms of play enacted by different scenarios, how people could like argue and engage these different forms at the end? Like, would that be a kind of literalization of what you, how you can imagine the end point of having these scenario, like these contested scenarios at the end?
So I would be a little bit more cynical and just say, like, it's my ability to imagine a theorist talking about this that would cause me to share and forward it. But I don't know that that ever actually needs to happen. I just think that like, it needs to be kind of catchy and funny in my ability to imagine that possible scenario and like snicker and then move on to the next.
Yeah, but you know, it's funny until one day a client will come and will give you this, and it's like, oh, I want this building, can you make it? And you will go like, oh my goodness. So, where do we find the person that created this burger? So, no, yeah, so I don't know, like that issue of play and humor in it, was that part of the objective of the thesis?
And the part two, I mean, we talked a little bit about the kind of radical incentivization. Like when you build really strong incentives, things happen. And so how do you build incentives? So like you move people, like you monetize things and people do things, right? Or you allow for play happen and incentivize it. So like you might have a platform for combinations, but the question about where incentive really lies, I think is really interesting, like an important point of what we do actually, but where incentive happens. And I think incentives are very different locations actually for this project.
I was comparing it to something more dumb, like people just share images. I mean, is there something, like, is there something of value in that? Like, they get around.
But they really get around when it's like worth something, or people are like able to print it or use it in different like unexpected ways, like then right, or use it as gameplay, like they start moving very, very fast.
I mean, in a way, it's kind of the formal equivalent of like a meme generator, where you can like you pick the image and then you pick the words and so on, right? But the question, maybe it's along the same lines as last year, would be like, is there enough, in a way, is there enough choice within the system that allows it to become discursive? I guess that's maybe the question, right? Like beyond, like at what point does combining two architectures sort of lose its discursive value, or not be able to carry with it a kind of longer discursive value? But I had a question about the appearance of the objects, maybe, right? Because there's like very specific appearances in the Twitter one, this mixed, I think it was like a texture map somehow, which is very different than these like ultra reflective things. And I was wondering if you could talk about the surfaces in relationship to speed. Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of legibility of colors that makes these travel in certain ways versus, I guess, the one that the Twitter experience is sort of like coloring the mesh faces or mesh points to expose again like previous authorships. But because you're receiving it, I guess, as feedback, you're more likely to zoom in and take a look and pick out the textures of it rather than see this maybe as a small icon, be prompted by be prompted because you saw it behind. So it was about like legibility of different scales based on your activity and the motivation. Again, with the objects on the shelf, like I saw them again, the color is a little more nuanced because you're more likely to pick them up or get close to them.
One thing that seems to happen consistently is the buildings retain their ground line, so more or less you're operating in plan, and then you're intersecting I mean, imagine if you saw a section problem, you stack these things, or you arrange them in space, or look, there's CCTV and it's up in the air balancing off corners. I mean, in other words, you don't yet transform the status of the object. It remains the same because of the composition, the rules that you've got going.
That's fair. I guess part of the motivation was not, it was technical insofar as, you know, how do you format dictate the choices we make right? So a format that needs to be printable needs to account for certain things. And so we have that to make choice about how you construct images. But yeah, it sort of, it doesn't get as strange, I guess.
Doesn't get trust.
Thanks to the chair, it was a great discussion. Also, thank you to our readers outside of MIT, Antonio, Curtis, and Andrew. And just to say thanks, and it was a pleasure watching you take on this persona throughout the semester, just seeing you take on clarity and
And I just want to thank all my helpers. They did so much work with it. So,
We'll continue.